welcome to Highway, which this week comes from Washington. No, not Washington, D.C., but Washington in the northeast of England. Now known as a large new town, it actually dates back to prehistoric and Norman times. In fact, the first written reference to Washington was in the 12th century charter of Bishop Ranulph Flambard. The area provided coal for the whole world from the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, but of Washington's mines, only the winding house and shaft head of F-Bit still remain, merely as a museum and landmark to remind everyone of a famous industrial past. Washington is also a popular stopping place for the many American tourists who visit the UK each year, because Washington Old Hall is the ancestral home of George Washington, who was, need I tell you, the first president of the United States, and who was inaugurated 200 years ago this year. The Old Hall stands with the historic Church of Holy Trinity in Washington Village, and together they represent a special relationship between two great English-speaking nations, a relationship for which the following hymn could have been written: We are one in the Spirit.
We are one in the Spirit, we are one in the Lord. We are one in the Spirit, we are one in the Lord. And we pray that all unity may one day be restored. And then, Lord, we are Christians by our love, by our love. Yes, then, Lord, we are Christians by our love. We will walk with each other, we will walk hand in hand. We will walk with each other, we will walk hand in hand. And together we'll spread the news that God is in our land. And then, Lord, we are Christians by our love, by our love. Yes, then, Lord, we are Christians by our love. All praise to the Father, from whom all things come, and all praise to Christ Jesus, his only Son, and all praise to the Spirit who makes us one. And then, Lord, we are Christians by our love, by our love. Yes, then, Lord, we are Christians by our love.
A parish church has stood on this hill overlooking Washington Village for over 800 years. A recent rector of Holy Trinity for some of those years, the Reverend David Horton. Nice to see you, David.
Nice to see you.
Now, you've moved on from Holy Trinity, haven't you?
Yes, my job now is to be ecumenical officer for Durham Diocese.
So what does that entail?
I'm still finding out, actually, but it's helping the Church of England parishes in their links with other churches.
I see.
And also working with other Christian denominations and being the approachable face of Anglicanism as best I can.
Yes. Well, how do you get into this kind of work?
I suppose Washington did it to me, and we spent all this time in Washington working together, and it gave me lots of practical experience to build on.
It's a great feeling here in Washington, is there?
Well, it's a great feeling for those who are into it.
Yes.
It might not strike everybody as the most obvious thing about Washington, but there's been a deep commitment for a lot of years that churches have to work together.
Now, David, we're standing between Holy Trinity Church and Washington Old Hall. What connection is there between the two over the years?
Well, at one stage that was the rectory, but not for many rectors. It's the home of the Washington family, and this church has been very much involved with the Washington family. Way back in 1983, we celebrated 800 years of the Washington family, and that was a great time for linking the church and the Old Hall. We always have a service on July the 4th here for American Independence Day. But I think most interesting, it's the link between church and community. And in 1983, we thought very much about that theme of what was the future for Washington over the next 800 days. We didn't try to do 800 years stargazing, just 800 days.
Well, finally, how do you see the future of church unity?
I think it's very much a business of people with differences and churches with differences learning to live together and to accept each other. And we had experience in Washington of working Anglicans with Methodists, Roman Catholics, and that was very important, and we didn't lose our identity, but we accepted each other. And I think the churches can give people a vision of community. That's really something that worries me about the world today, where people, particularly in this country, seem to be disappearing into their houses, and they're cut off from one another. And somehow the church can live out a kind of parable, if you like, of what it means to be part of a community where you're accepted for what you are. You don't have to earn your way. You don't have to be successful. You can just come and share life together, break bread together.
Let us break bread together on our knees. Let us break bread together on our knees. When I fall on my knees, with my face to the rising sun, oh Lord, have mercy on me. Let us drink wine together on our knees. Oh, let us drink wine together on our knees. When I fall on my knees, with my face to the rising sun, oh Lord, have mercy on me. Let us praise God together on our knees. Let us praise God together on
We've now come to the kitchen of Washington Old Hall, the ancestral home of George Washington, and this is the starting point for the tour which many Americans take each year. And with me is volunteer guide at the hall, Fred Embleton. Fred, nice to meet you.
Pleased to meet you, Sally.
Settle one thing for me. George Washington wasn't born here, was he?
No, he wasn't, Sally. George Washington was born in America, 1732. The connection with George Washington and this particular village is the fact that in the 12th century, when this house was built, the headman of the village would take the name of the village. He was headman of Hartburn, a little village outside Stockton. He became headman and was named William de Hartburn. He moved here in 1180 and became headman of Wessington, which is Anglo-Saxon for Washington. And this is the beginning of the line of the Washington family. William de Washington.
I see. Now, this is part of the old house, is it? Original.
This particular part of the kitchen is the original 1183 structure.
Yeah.
The archways and the fireplace and etc.
Yeah.
Now, the family moved from here.
Oh, there you are.
They moved from here to Soulgrave in Northamptonshire. And in 1657, two brothers, John and Lawrence, emigrated to Westmoreland County in Virginia. And George was born 3 generations later in America.
What kind of man was George Washington?
Well, he was a religious man. He actually helped build Christ Church in Alexandria, where he worshipped. He was an engineer. He was a surveyor. He stood 6'3½".
Did he?
And, of course, he was a born leader, as all of his forefathers were. He was asked to lead, which was an obvious choice, to lead the revolution against Britain. But George was a loyalist. He still looked at King George III as his king for all they'd been there 3 generations. And there was a lot of pretenders who wanted to lead the revolution, but George was the one the people wanted. And unfortunately, he did eventually lead the revolution. And at 3 stages, they were on the brink of defeat. But George rallied the army, and eventually victory went to the Americans. And through this, we could think that had one of the pretenders led the revolution,
We might still have America.
we might still have a Commonwealth of America.
But what happened here after the Washington family left?
In 1613, the Bishop of Durham bought the house, and they lived here for roughly 200 years. And then just before the end of last century, it suddenly became derelict, and we had living in here, they blocked it off in tenements, and people began to move in and live in a tenement block. There's some people what live in the village were actually born here.
Were they?
In 1936, it was due to be pulled down. The council came to pull it down, but a local historian, it was Frederick Hill, who was the local schoolmaster, he set up a little fund and began restoration of the house with some benefactors from America, and then, of course, the National Trust, and a lot of help from the Sunderland Council, and through their endeavours, they've made it as it is now, a 17th century house, manor house.
Very nice too, isn't it?
It is too,
Yes.
yes.
Any American US presidents been here?
Well, yes, Harry. In 1977, my wife and myself, we just became custodians of the house, and this was in April, and 3 days later, we got the phone call from the embassy to say that Jimmy Carter, the American president, was going to visit Washington Old Hall, said, from Washington, D.C. to Washington, D.C., because we were Durham County. And he duly came on May the 6th, 1977. He brought us a picture, which we have in the hall, and also a tree. Now, George Washington didn't only chop down trees, he planted trees. Then he planted in Mount Vernon a tulip poplar tree. And Jimmy Carter brought a cutting of that tree back to the village and planted it on the village green.
That's a nice thing to say,
It
isn't
very
it?
is, yes, really is.
Thanks a lot, Fred.
Thank you.
Now, the Washingtons have left us a whole fund of stories, but the whole area is rich in legend, probably the most popular being the one about the Lambton Worm, which seemed to have wound itself around the nearby Worm Hill, though some say it was the Penshaw Hill, crowned by this monument, built in honour of the first Earl of Durham, whose ancestor is said to have slain the worm. The area bore the brunt of industrial decline, but today there's regeneration. The huge new town has a population of some 62,000 people, with this major shopping centre at its heart. The impressive waterfowl park, opened by Sir Peter Scott, has an international reputation, and the Japanese car company Nissan chose Washington as its first European centre. Now here's someone who's always very much welcomed across the Atlantic. But I'll never forget, she's one of the most exciting singers Britain has ever produced. Shani Wallace. Hello, Shani. Nice to see you. Now, we haven't met since Oliver, have we?
That's right. It's a long time.
Yeah, how long is it?
20 years. And we had a big anniversary in California, and we missed you, Harry.
Ah, one boy for sale. Because you've been in America for a long time.
Yes, I have. 25 years.
You feel American?
Not really. My roots are still here, and I must say that now that I'm back, I'm having the most incredibly wonderful time.
Great.
Really great.
Because your life changed in America. You got married for a start.
Yes.
You have
I have a lovely daughter, Rebecca.
and, of course, you took the Jewish faith, didn't you?
Yes, I did. And actually, there wasn't a wrench for me. I felt that, you know, the religions, the principles of the two religions, Jewish and Christianity, are very much the same. And I feel it has made me stronger.
And, of course, as singers, we realise ourselves the value of the therapy of music, don't we?
Oh, there's nothing like it. There's absolutely nothing like it. I mean, I just feel it gets rid of all the pressures, don't you?
I do. Opens doors, too.
Yes, in fact.
Yep.
Can I give you an example of that, Harry?
But, of course.
If you're feeling gloomy, then just listen to me. You'll find your troubles will fly away. If you just look around you and say, it's a lovely day today. So whatever you've got to do, you've got a lovely day to do it in. That's true. But perhaps whatever you've got to do is something that can be done by two. For I'd really like to stay. It's a lovely day today. And whatever you've got to do, I'd be so happy to be doing it with you. But if you've got something that must be done, and it can only be done by one, there is nothing more to say, except it's a lovely day for saying it's a lovely day. It's a lovely day today. If you something that must be done now, don't forget. be done by 2. For I'd really like to say it's a lovely day today, and whatever you've got to do, I'd be so happy to be doing it with you. But if you've got something that must be done, and it can only be done by one, there is nothing more to say, except it's a lovely day for saying it's a lovely day.
Well done, Shani. Great. Now, when the new town began here, the Washington Development Corporation turned the old Biddick farm into a community arts center. The center provides a wide range of art forms and services, catering for all tastes and interests, from rock music to classical dance, and from street theater to traditional crafts. Jerry Wilmer and David Kemick are 2 local artists who take their inspiration from the themes of landscape and wildlife. After recent world travels, they've returned to Washington and come together with this display of their work from sketchbook to finished pieces. The exhibition provides a colourful backdrop for the Chopin study in A-flat, played for us now by young Washington pianist Michael Crilly. Animals have always played their part in the everyday life of Washington. There's one now. A century ago, this area was the home for many pit ponies. And today, horses and ponies are still to be seen working, because this town boasts one of the largest riding centres for the disabled in the country. And with me is the person who started it all, Mrs. Nora Strang. Nora, how did it all come about?
Well, it's a long, long time ago,
Yeah?
when we started in South Shields a branch of the Polio Fellowship. and they wanted me
Hello.
to
Sorry, he
do
called me Terry Wogan.
they wanted me to do something with the children.
Yes.
And I could only think of doing something probably a little different. They were all disabled. And watching my niece have her first riding lesson, jumping lesson, I thought, wouldn't that be lovely if the polio children could come? Of course, there was opposition immediately from my husband, who's a medical man.
Yes. He's a doctor,
But we,
isn't he?
yes, but we talked that over, and I won, and we started. We found right from the beginning that it was going to be useful in lots of ways. We went to see one of the local riding sort of establishments, and he said we could have everything he had for free if we had
great.
it on his riding master's day off.
Yes.
It was the local riding school. And the children were sort of arrived, and that was it. And we soon found that it was going to do a lot of good, physically, mentally,
Yeah, what do the
every way.
kids, what do they get out of it?
Well, I think a lot of pleasure, physically, psychologically, and socially.
Yes.
They can sort of tell their friends, well, we ride,
Yeah, great.
which a lot of children can't do. And it just started like that. And but we soon found that it had to be opened out to everybody, because if a child comes and said, well, it might have been polio, what do you do?
Yes, of course, yes. You
So
can't
we
stop.
decided we would have to be a separate an entity. One or two people came to see us and said, oh, they like the idea. So eventually, when there were about 5 or 6 of us in the country doing it, we decided that what we must do was get together, and we formed an advisory council for riding for the disabled. A few years after that, we formed the Riding for the Disabled as it is known now. Now, that was in 1954 when we
Was it?
started. Yeah.
Now, Princess Anne, the Princess Royal, opened this, didn't
Yes,
she?
yes.
What's her involvement with the association?
Well, she is involved with the National Association. We are a group.
Yes.
Each group must be autonomous, of course. Whether they're big or small, it doesn't make any difference. She was made patron, and Lavinia, Duchess of Norfolk, was president at the time. And then a few years after that, they swapped jobs.
I see, so now she's the president.
Now she's president,
I see,
and she's very involved. We have now, from the beginnings, about 600 groups around the country, maybe
As many
more.
as that?
Yes.
How many horses have you got here, for
We have
example?
30,
Have you?
yes, and a donkey.
So, what's the future then? How do you see, what plans have you got for the future?
Well, all this place here is going to be cleared off, as it were, and a double-storey building going to be put on to give us more room, which will give us more amenities for everybody, the riders, the helpers, the visitors.
Thank you very much, Nora. Now, those of us who help and work with animals know only too well the bond of friendship and understanding that's created. Someone else who knows this is television's best-known vet, Christopher Timothy, who reads for us now from The Brothers Karamazov by Dostoevsky, the prayer, Love of Life.
Lord, may we love all your creation, all the earth and every grain of sand in it. May we love every leaf, every ray of your light. May we love the animals. You have given them the rudiments of thought and joy untroubled. Let us not trouble it. Let us not harass them. Let us not deprive them of their happiness. Let us not work against your intent. For we acknowledge unto you that all is like an ocean. All is flowing and blending. And that to withhold any measure of love from anything in your universe is to withhold the same measure from you.
Washington Waterfowl Park certainly withholds no such love. On the contrary, it provides humans as well as animals with the peace and sanctuary that they all seek. The same peace, in fact, provided by our highway viewer, Eric Saunders, in this, our final hymn, Peace in Our Hearts. Well, that's the end of our highway for this week. Washington has reminded me of the many links and bonds which bring people together. Summed up in our opening hymn, we will walk with each other, we will walk hand in hand. Next week, highway comes from Oxford. I'll see you then.
Has Mrs. Thatcher brought about an economic miracle in Britain? Last week, Peter Jay put the case against the government. This week, in part 2 of the Thatcher years, Miracle or Mirage, Norman Tebbit defends Mrs. Thatcher's economic record. Brian Walden holds the ring. You at home are the jury. The Thatcher years on trial. Sunday evening at 10:35 on ITV.
Announced that there could be another takeover bid. And struggling Hartlepool United decide the manager stays.
Also tonight, the prize-winning farmer who believes in conservation. And Frosty tells us a bedtime story.
Thomas the Tank Engine is very... Good evening. First...